Hi, everyone. This is Sue Erickson. I'm Associate Director of Open Learning 18, and I am thrilled today to be helping bring you this global Google Hangout on open access. We have a number of experts with us today, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. And before they do that, I will have my co-facilitator introduce herself. Maha?
Thank you, Sue. Hi, I'm Maha Bali. I'm an associate professor of practice at the Center for Learning and Teaching at the American University in Cairo. And I'm co-facilitating this Hangout with Sue as part of Open Learning 18. And so we have today with us 3 educators from 3 different continents. I'm really happy that we were able to manage all 3 of them with us today. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, who they are, but also their story of, just a quick story of how they got into the field of open. So I think, could we start with you, Peter, and then Yvonne, and then Thomas?
Sure. I'm Peter Suber. I'm the director of the Office for Scholarly Communication at Harvard. I got into open access in the early days of the World Wide Web. I was a professor of philosophy. I had published in print before the web came along, and I wanted to play with HTML or play with the web, and I was looking for something to put online. So I began to put up HTML copies of my publications. And some of them were more than 10 years old at that time. And I began to get serious correspondence from readers from the web editions that I never got from the print editions. It occurred to me that this was a useful tool for scholarship. It wasn't just a geeky playground. And I began to use it that way myself. And I began to look for others who saw that potential in the internet and the web. And from that, I slowly started developing my newsletter, which monitored the scene and gave perspective on it. And then at a certain point, I had to quit my job and devote myself full-time to open access. And I've done that ever since 2003.
Thank you, Peter. Yvonne? And Thomas, could you mute yourself, please?
Okay. Yeah, so hello everyone, this is Yvonne Lugano. I'm from Mexico, and I am ambassador for Latin America for the Directory of Open Access Journals, the DOAJ. I'm working with the DOAJ since 2016, and I came to the openness world since the early 2000 years, because when I was a student, I studied 2 bachelor's degrees, one in education and then another one in dance studies. And as you may know, in the field of dance studies, the research on dance, there are not many resources of information with quality and with serious research. And that was a problem for us as students. And I realized that we didn't have enough and reliable resources to do our research, or to, for example, analyze works on dance. So I was interested in analyzing this phenomenon. Why in this specific field we don't have enough information, and then that interest go deeper in the next years, and then I started to work with journals in my faculty, the Faculty of Education. Then I worked for the Redalyc database, that is a very big database of open access journals in Latin America, that is based in my university, the University of the State of Mexico. And then I was in charge there to review the journals in order to be indexed in the database. So I learned a lot about journals, about publishing, and about open access. I remember I read the book of Peter Suber, because it was like a mandatory, or not mandatory, but it was a text to show and to know what was happening in those years about the access to knowledge. And then, well, after Redalyc, I finished my thesis on dance, thanks to the world I knew in terms of information on dance studies in the website, in the World Wide Web, and then I started to work with the OAJ. Now I am working with them. I am collaborating with many editorial boards of journals, open access journals in our region, and well, I think I am realizing as well that the open access landscapes is very related to education systems.
Thank you, Yvonne. Thomas, could you tell us how you started working on open?
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Thomas Mboa from Cameroon. I have a bachelor in biochemistry. That is my first background. Then I did a training as a biology teacher for secondary school. So my first involved in open was in terms of open educational resources, because in my first years of as a teacher of biology, I facing many problems to get information, to get educational resources for my students. And I began to try to understand how I can get more information to give a good courses in my place. And I was very attracted by the idea of commons, the idea of local knowledge, how to use endogenous knowledge in my class to explain or to teach biology to my students in order for them to understand what we are doing, because biology was at this time very colonial. You know, many example was borrowing from other contexts. So my role and my work was to take local example and try to explain in my courses. So, but I can say that I embrace the word open, the word of openness, really in 2015 with this great project launched by Leslie Chan with OCSDNet. So in this project, I was involved in SOA, science, open science in Haiti and Africa, French African speaking country, which was supposed to understand the obstacle to the adoption of open science in French speaking African countries. So at this time, I really feel inside the open world, the openness world is due to my involvement in this project with the OCSD network. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. And Sue, I think I'd like to ask Sue as well, what got her into open?
Thanks, Maha. So I'm a librarian. I'm the library director at Virginia Wesleyan University in Virginia in the United States. And open access is something that libraries have been involved in really, I guess, since the beginning. So it was just part of my education to be aware of open access. In terms of other types of open, it was really working with Open Learning 17 last year that I got involved in that. I had an interest in open educational resources. So like Thomas kind of came to the rest of open through that. And then got pulled in to help organize Open Learning 17 and then continue on with this. And of course, Open Learning 17 is how I got to know Maha. So that's been really great.
Okay, and I'm going to share a quick story of mine, and I'm going to jump to something that's happening, hopefully happening soon, based on something that happened last year. So I got into open when I was finalizing my PhD, and there was a lot of political instability in Egypt at the time. It was 2013. And I had access to several digital libraries, but there were certain things that I needed hard copies of, and they weren't available in any of the libraries, and I couldn't do interlibrary loan and things like that. And what helped me was that some people had posted their stuff as green open access, so that I could find it, even though it was supposed to be more difficult to find. And there were also a few illegal copies that were freely available online, and I was really grateful for that, because then I wasn't delayed by having to wait until someone could get me a legal copy. But then after that, I just generally became passionate about that, and I promised myself as much as possible that I would make my own work open as much as possible and advocate for it. And I've been on that road. Last year, when we met Peter and a few other people, Peter mentioned that an institution, a university, can have a policy where all of their faculty have to make their work available, at least green open access, on the university repository. And so I got together with a colleague of mine, and we're hoping to try to do that for Egypt soon, and for my institution, obviously, and to also possibly also translate all the abstracts into Arabic so that they're also accessible to an Arab audience. So that's where the most recent thing I'm doing with Open. And I wanted to ask everyone else, and I mean, whoever wants to speak first, I guess we don't have to keep going in the same order, but what is one of the things you're working on in the field of Open right now that you're very excited about, or that's very new, that you'd like to share with other folks? Or maybe it's a question, whatever you'd like to start with. I think Yvonne is nodding really hard, so I think maybe she has something to say.
Well, yeah, I would like to start, because I'm really excited about this research that I started last year, or no, in 2016. And it's regarding the policies and systems of evaluation of journals in Latin America. We have strong systems of evaluation of or assessment of journals since the late 90s. And then some researchers realized that we are now in a moment that we are perhaps going a step back, because the new systems of evaluation, for example, in Mexico and in Colombia, are retaking this idea of the impact factor as the indicator as the major and the main indicator to see if a journal is a quality journal or not. And it's a very exciting research, because we in Latin America has developed a lot of ideas and research on the opposite side of the impact factor. I mean, we are in the mid, I don't know, in 2010, for example, 2011, we started to say, well, it's time to stop academics evaluation based only in an indicator of citation of the journal. So we were trying to design policies more coherent to our needs of spreading the knowledge that we produce. And then with these new policies in these two countries, Mexico and Colombia, we are like taking a step back, because the most important now is, again, to be in the two more international databases of journals. I mean, Web of Science and Scopus. The new system in Mexico, for example, classifies the journals in 8 stages. And the first 4 stages correspond to the quartiles of the Scopus or Web of Science database. So it seems like these quartiles, or these categories that have these 2 databases, are the main, or the main concern for our system of science production, in terms of, okay, the journals needs to be there to be considered as quality journals. And I think it's a paradox, because we in our region have advocated a lot for the open access in terms of spreading our knowledge, not only to access to the knowledge that is indexed in this kind of databases, but spreading and evaluating our knowledge that is produced in our languages, with our needs or attending our problems. I mean, and now with these two cases, we are in the community in Latin America are kind of worried about what could happen in other countries or in other policies, national policies or institutional policies, if we continue, I mean, going in this circle that is indexes, citation, and again the same discussions that we had in when we changed our century. I mean, what happened with all the learning that we have in these years, and I'm very excited to do research on that. And actually, I would like to present a proposal for a PhD or something like that to do research, because for us, in my case, to do research on that, it's like in my free time. I mean, I have my work and that, but I will really think that we need more research in that topics in our region and in the world, because if not, we perhaps have the risk to go and to the past. I mean, well, this is my general idea. Sorry if I was talking too much, but of course I hope this could be interesting for the audience.
No, thank you, Yvonne. This is, I mean, it's actually quite sad, because you say that you've made advances in a very different kind of direction, in the sense of valuing local knowledge and the local language. And then, of course, when you do research in the local language and about local topics, of course, the citations are not going to be very high, they're not going to be very international, but the impact of the work itself in the region is probably very good. And so you mentioned the kinds of things they're going back to, Scopus and all that. But what were the kinds of metrics that you were starting to have people focus on instead? And what happened to those? Like, are they just less priority now, or?
Yeah, I think, well, I don't know all the cases in the region in Latin America. I know more the case in Mexico. And I heard that a reform of the system of evaluation of academics will change for the next year, or I think this year, I don't remember exactly. And I'm not sure what kind of metrics they will consider. But the thing is that they will keep considering the publication in journals, right? So I think our policies should focus on our journals and how can we say that our journals are with good quality and good channels for communicating our science. And I think some of the initiatives in Latin America has done a lot of work in that, especially Cielo, Latindex, and Redolic. And I think we need to strengthen these initiatives and these things that they have established as quality of journals, because they, for example, think that internationalization of journal is not only to put them in these databases, but also to have more variety of authors from different institutions, and they Cielo and Redolic, for example, have developed indicators, metrics to see that data, for example, how many authors collaborate with others, etc. So I think this kind of metrics has not the main point in the national policies, at least in Mexico. So I think it's a pity, because we have a background on research on these kinds of topics and concerns about our knowledge, and then these policies are not, for me, in my opinion, in others' opinion, is not the best way. Because, for example, in Colombia, with this new classification of journals, the top category, that is A1, it just has one journal, in Colombia. So, but they have, they say we had a curve of learning on how to publish journals, digital journals using OJS, and they have a lot of experience taking workshops and that, because the institutions has invested in these human resources to publish journals, and then these journals that are going that are increasing their quality with this new classification. It's like the past is not there. I mean, it's like they use a word that is revisticidio. It's like journal side. They are killing journals because some journals will disappear, or some other journals will go in fusion with others. So what will happen with these editors, with these people, with these resources that universities, for example, are investing? I don't know if I'm clear, but this is kind of the main concerns in my research, but in others in the community in Latin America.
Yeah, I think as soon as you said disappear, Thomas disappeared. I hope he'll be able to come back into the hangout. But thank you so much for sharing the details of that, Yvonne. And when you were mentioning also the collaborative authorship thing, I was thinking that in a lot of academia, they're more encouraging of single authorship for tenure and promotion and things like that. And that's very sad, because collaborative work is actually a lot more work and should be valued for what it is. And hopefully, I'm hoping there's going to be a change, a shift in academia with that as well. Peter, would you like to follow from that? Just unmute yourself. Thank you.
Yep. I could follow up on what Yvonne said, or just talk about some of the things I'm doing. But let me start with a comment on what she said. There's a difficult tension here. On the one hand, we want research from Mexico and Colombia to be visible around the world. One way to do that is to make it open. And one way to make it visible even after it's open is to shine a spotlight on certain journals and say, these are high in quality. If you're researching topics covered by these journals, pay attention. On the other hand, we want to discourage authors from focusing on the venue of publication and focusing more on the quality of publication and access terms. So it should not matter where you publish your work. If it's open and it's indexed in every search engine, and if it has high quality, then it should reach the people who need to see it, regardless of the journal in which it was published. That's a tension that will be hard to resolve for a long time. Open access work tends to become visible because it's open. On the other hand, that doesn't make it influential just because it's open, and we have to nudge it sometimes by bringing it to the attention of the people who are in that field. As for what I'm doing, my main job is to implement the open access policies at Harvard, but I spend a lot of my time helping other institutions with open access policies and open access practices, including other universities. So by the way, Maha, I'd be delighted to work with you on the policy that you're trying to develop at the American University of Cairo. Apart from that, apart from helping implement policies at universities, I'm monitoring open infrastructure for open access. Several pieces of open infrastructure were for-profit and were bought out by Elsevier, or were for-profit from the start and are still for-profit even if they're not owned by a larger entity. And I think the time has come, or is past due, for all of us to think about putting together a wall-to-wall series of pieces of open infrastructure to support open access that cannot be enclosed by corporations or cannot be bought out, and whose future is entirely up to the research community and not anyone else. So there are lots of these, lots of pieces of open infrastructure. Some of them aspire to be comprehensive. Some of them are just pieces that plug into each other to make a mosaic or an interoperable ecosystem. But I'm monitoring all of those. I would like all of us to pay attention and think about shifting to that infrastructure as it becomes ready. And to me, open infrastructure is at the very least open source. I also hope that it's hosted or developed or owned by nonprofit entities. And if it's nonprofit and open source, or if it's at least open source, then there's some hope that it can spread. and that it can be adapted or modified or enhanced, customized to suit all the institutions of the world. We do have different needs, and if there's a system of interoperable modules serving different functions for open access, but one of them doesn't serve you very well or your institution, it's possible to write a new module that does better and just plug it into the system of interoperable modules. So this way, we don't have to petition a company that produces the software and stand in line with all the other requested enhancements and sometimes get no for an answer, or sometimes get a feature that still doesn't exactly serve our needs. We can get what serves our needs, and we can also preserve it in the long term from corporate capture and keep it inside the research community.
Thank you for this, Peter. There's a question on Twitter from Gardner Campbell, and he's saying he'd love to know whether the panelists feel that national governments ought to require open access for federally funded research. I think some countries do that.
Yes.
The UK, I think, some European countries. Do you think this is something that all governments should do? So this question for both of you.
Strong yes from me.
Yes, of course, of course.
Right.
Okay, so no qualifiers. What about, sorry?
These governments are spending public money.
Okay.
And by the way, even private foundations that fund research should make the research they fund open access. But in the case of governments and public funding agencies, they're spending taxpayer dollars, and they owe it back to the public. By all means, they should do it. It's a growing trend. It's done in at least a dozen countries today. In the United States, it's not done for every single funding agency, but we now do it for nearly 24 of the largest funding agencies. I'd like to see it spread here in this country, but also spread to every other government.
The issue for me with that question, though, I'll let you talk in a second. Sorry, Yvonne, in a second. Is that a lot of the time it ends up happening that people then end up paying subscription journals to make the article open access, gold open access, which Peter last time called double dipping. So I'll let Yvonne talk and go back to you again, Peter, on this one.
No, yeah, I would like to say that in Latin America, especially, for example, in Argentina and in Mexico, we have law reforms that now it's mandatory for institutions to put their output in open access. For example, in Argentina, they have strong laws in data, in research data. They will have to put the data after, I think, 6 months. The research is finished. So we in Latin America believe that it is very important for society to spread the knowledge that the society has already paid with the taxes and that. But I think the results of these policies are good. We need to do a lot of things in terms of infrastructure to put these outputs really on open access for everyone. But I think the consequences are very good for us, and I think that the laws are perfectible, and then there are now new concerns, but it's an absolutely yes.
I can answer Maha's question too. Hybrid journals are a problem, and there are two responses. First, the funding agencies, whether they're public or private, should not require publishing in any kind of journal whatsoever. They should require green open access. Let the grantees publish wherever they like, provided they put a copy in an open access repository. And there are ways to make that completely lawful. That is, the pioneers here were the NIH and Wellcome Trust. They both said to their grantees, if you take our money, then you must retain rights that allow you to authorize us to make the work open in a repository. So it's a green policy, but it still does not require publisher permission. That's the first thing. You don't pay any APCs to anybody. But secondly, if you do pay APCs for those grantees who choose to publish in APC-based journals, then do not pay fees at hybrid journals. Harvard has a fund to pay APCs for its faculty, but we refuse to pay APCs at hybrid journals. Many other universities take the same position. And if you saw the news this week, the Wellcome Trust is thinking about taking the same approach. Right now, it is willing to pay fees at hybrids, and many other funders, by the way, are also willing, but it's rethinking that. It's rethinking it for several reasons. First, the average APC at a hybrid journal is significantly higher than the average APC at a full open access journal. Secondly, as you pointed out, hybrid journals still charge subscriptions to gain access to the rest of their content, and they don't free up any library money. We want to free up library money so it can be spent in support of open access instead of being spent in support of subscription journals. And then there is the double dipping problem. We should absolutely not pay twice for the same articles, and public money especially should not pay twice. The Wellcome Trust pointed out it's got more money than most governments to spend on this particular cause, but it's spending too much on double dipping hybrid journals, and it wants to save money. It's a very reasonable goal, and so it's taking this very seriously. If there's any hesitation or pushback, it's that many authors still want to publish in non-hybrid journals. The answer to that is either don't take our money or publish in those non-hybrid journals, but make your work green open access and forget about APCs.
And I think I'm really happy to hear this direction is happening. I mean, I would hope that also that, you know, faculties, departments will start to also not value those journals more than other journals is the thing. The issue is that some people are told you have to publish in a tier 1 journal. I mean, and that's the only way you're going to get tenured or promoted. And so if that one, yeah, and then the option is then green open access. And one of the, I don't know if people know about this tool, it's called Unpaywall. So one of the issues with green open access is that if you don't necessarily know how to reach it, you might not be able to find it. I think Google Scholar eventually finds open access versions of articles, but it doesn't always do that. And there's a tool called Unpaywall that you install on your browser, and it'll tell you if an article is available in open access, even though the official journal page is subscription-based, for example.
Yes. One point on Google Scholar, it does a pretty good job of finding open access copies, but when it finds more than one version of the same article, it puts the publisher's version first. And there's a little link under it that says, see the other versions, or that is the other versions that we know about. And you usually have to click on that one to find the green open access copies. But when you do, they're usually there.
Yeah, that's another really useful tip. I hadn't thought of that because I thought they always, if there's a PDF or whatever, they put it there. And then I do know there sometimes shows other versions, but I didn't think that one of them might be open access, even if it wasn't clear from the beginning. So thanks for that. Yvonne, do you have any other tricks, or Sue, for finding open access versions of things?
Yeah, using DOAJ, the Directory of Open Access Journals. I mean, because you were talking about this value that we, or the policies, give to some journals that have APCs and that are gold open access and that. But I want to say two things about this. First of all is that we, for example, in like Latin America and other parts of Asia, for example, we have journals that meet quality criteria, and we don't have APCs. Our model is different because the journals in Latin America, in most of the cases, are public funded because are published by institutions like universities or research centers. So mainly our journals are funded by the governments and the institutions. And this is, of course, not a model without problems. I mean, we, of course, have issues on the sustainability of this model. But as far as I have seen in, for example, in our database that is the OAJ, the APCs in Latin America are not more like, for example, $300. Sorry. So, and this is in some cases with journals that are published by societies and associations, scientific associations, not universities. And we, as I said before, we have learned a lot on how to make quality journals in Latin America, and I would really like to share a really nice experience that I had, because I had the notifications of, you know, when you follow an author and then you can follow his publications and that. And this researcher is an American researcher on dance studies precisely. And she published a new article. I think it's a very strong paper that it's very important in our field. And when I follow the publication, I realized that she has published that paper in a Brazilian journal. And I think it's a good sign to see that our journals are valuable as well, and we can make it visible for other authors in order to offer them options to publish their papers in a channel that will give them the tools and opportunities to spread their work. So I think the main problem as well, again, sorry, is to discuss what are the criteria to say these journals are the best ones. I mean, we have technology as well in Latin America or in other regions, and we have good channels for communication of science in terms of what the public, I mean, the audience can find easily the articles, or with good tools in the screen and that. So I think it's a discussion again on why are we considering good quality journals.
I can add from the library perspective, we've been seeing more of the databases and our library discovery systems picking up more of the open access journals. From the standpoint of a vendor supplying a database, it's an easy way for them to add journals in terms of the journals that they index. And so it's kind of an easy marketing tool for them, I think, to be able to say that they've added 2,000 more journals. Well, they might all be open access journals, and that's fine. I think we're also noticing more international journals coming through that. So I think it is happening some in terms of the article databases. And then locally, if libraries have a discovery system like we do, we can choose different collections of open access to make searchable for our students and faculty.
And one of the things I know about, just thinking back about the directory of open access journals, is that they went through a process where they pruned out the journals, and now every journal that's indexed on directory of open access journals is a good quality journal, right? Like I think they made sure that all of them are good quality, so at least you know that if it's indexed on DOAJ, then it's a good one.
Well, yeah, actually the process of evaluation of a journal is it's done by at least 3 or 4 people from our team that are experts on library information sciences and that. So we will assure that the journals that are indexed in the DOAJ has passed an evaluations, so they meet the criteria of quality that were done or were proposed by OASPA, COPE, DOAJ, and the World Medical Journals Association. So it's a group of criteria that assures you that the quality in the editorial processes, and by that I mean peer review, plagiarism, etc. The technological stuff, I think, for example, in the DOIs, the DOIs, or other elements in terms of digital tools that can facilitate and that can give more opportunities for people to spread the knowledge with quality. So you can consult the criteria in the DOAJ website, and then you can see that we are in the DOAJ. We are worried about, for example, the copyright things, or the technological things, and the quality of editorial processes. So we are kind of a white list, yeah, in terms of that we provide a list of journals that are really serious journals that has passed this evaluation.
So we have another question from our Twitter feed. Again, that's the hashtag OpenLearning18. If anybody would like to ask a question. This is another question from Gardner Campbell, who works in the humanities. And he's asking, he's commenting that open access conversations tend to be very science oriented. So he's asking, how can open access values and practices be adopted more widely in the humanities?
I can take that on because I'm from the humanities. My field is philosophy. First of all, open access provides the same benefits in the humanities that it does in the sciences. It provides greater access, completely free access. It benefits readers for the same reason. They can find and retrieve and read what they want. And it helps authors that find a wider audience and achieve greater impact. So all the benefits are the same, but there are reasons why the progress is moving more slowly in the humanities. One of the obvious ones is that much more public funding goes into the sciences than the humanities. We can talk about why that's the case, but it is the case, and it's the case everywhere. And the public funding argument was one of the most effective arguments, still is one of the most effective arguments for open access. So insofar as we free up research funded by public money, we free up the sciences in more than a 10-to-1 ratio. In the United States, for example, we had recently under the Obama administration a policy to require all the federal funding agencies with a budget of $100 million or more in funding for research to adopt an open access policy. This didn't even cover all of our science agencies, but it covered about 24, and it did not cover the only agency that we have funding humanities research because its total budget was, or at least budget for research was smaller than that. And it's similar around the world. There are other reasons. Gold open access, for example, often requires APCs. It doesn't always require them. But when it does, then the amount of the APC is roughly proportional to the journal's rejection rate. Because for every journal that it publishes, it peer reviews and then rejects, let's say 2, 3, 4, 5, or 10 other articles. So the higher the rejection rate, the more articles it has to review per APC. And most people are surprised to hear that humanities journals have significantly higher rejection rates than science journals. Again, we can talk about why that's the case, but it is the case almost everywhere. And finally, I think one of the other important variables is that preprint repositories took off very early in the sciences and very late in the humanities because there's a greater need for learning quickly about other research in your own field in the sciences and less need to learn quickly in the humanities, even though there's a great benefit in learning quickly in the humanities. So the humanities can catch up in all these ways if they want to, except the public funding way. And there are a growing number of peer-reviewed open access journals in the humanities, a growing number of repositories that accept work in the humanities, and a growing number of preprint repositories in the humanities, which I think is surprising a lot of people. But another way to put it is that you get more advocates talking about open access in the sciences because there are more working examples of open access in the sciences. More people understand open access who work in the sciences than understand open access who work in the humanities. So it's not that the open access is somehow intrinsically about science or intrinsically favorable to science. It's that more people in the sciences know what it is and want it, and more people in the humanities are still climbing that curve.
Yeah, if I may add something, I think the digital humanities community are now more interested in adopting, for example, the discussion in journals in the field, because they have developed a lot of software and digital tools to improve their research in the humanities, but the access wasn't a main concern. And now, for example, this year in Mexico will be held the Digital Humanities Conference, and then they are starting to look at the open access community and to invite them to share our thoughts in this area, because they are realizing, as Peter said, late, but they are realizing that all the output that they are creating with these tools, it's very valuable, but sometimes it's not in open access.
Yes. You reminded me of one other important difference. In the sciences, the primary literature is the journal article. In the humanities, it tends to be the book. And it's objectively more difficult to provide open access to books. It just costs more than to provide open access to articles. Doesn't mean there are obstacles in the way of articles in the humanities, and many humanist scholars do write articles, but will take a lot longer to get open access to the primary literature, the books in humanities, than we're getting for the primary literature in the sciences.
That also makes a lot of sense. I'm really sorry that Thomas has left and is not able to come back. It's just a reminder, I think, when we talk about open access, that you need to be in the technology to be able to have the access. And it seems, I'm not really sure why he can't get back into the Hangout. He hasn't been responding to emails. But hopefully he'll join us in some other way at some point. I was thinking about something, you know, I'm really jealous of Latin America and their direction about open access, because I'll tell you guys, I don't know if this is a well-known thing about Egypt, but we've had a project for maybe a couple of years now called the Egyptian Knowledge Bank. And this, yeah, my webcam is off because it's dark. I turned the lights off. Sue was asking. Okay. So we had the Egyptian Knowledge Bank, where the government paid a few publishers to give access to a good number of journals to everyone in Egypt, so that universities in Egypt don't have an imbalance of who has access to which journals, which is really good, because it used to be that my institution was richer than other institutions, but it doesn't have a school of medicine, for example. And one university that has a school of medicine has access and another one doesn't. And so they had different kinds of access to knowledge. But the problem with this model, I think, is twofold. One of them is that it doesn't encourage open access. It encourages people to keep using subscription journals because now they have access to them. And then the other problem with it is that it's about accessing knowledge and not contributing to knowledge, which I think also Yvonne was talking about. And I think it just doesn't really necessarily give the right message to local scholars to try to develop their own journals and make them strong and make knowledge, indigenous, back to what Thomas was talking about. I mean, we don't usually use the term indigenous for Egypt, but, local knowledge. And it makes it, again, more about, the Western colonial knowledge coming to us and just trying to access that. So I'm just trying to think about how to change that conversation, but I think at least I'll take Peter up on his offer to help us out with changing the policy at my institution as a start. And Nkoudou is also supporting it, but she doesn't have time to do it. So I'm going to use your time to do that. We've got 10 more minutes to go. I don't know if Sue has a question to ask or wants to sort of close off with a final reflection.
I think one thing that's fascinating to me that we've touched on today is this idea of local knowledge and wanting to expand that, but also this global impact as well, and wanting to increase the global impact of certain journals or certain scholarly communities. And so I guess I don't necessarily think those things are in tension. And I wonder about what you all think about that. Can these two things happen together, and is there some benefit back and forth between that?
Yes, I can start on that. There's a tension. There's no contradiction. You can have open access to local knowledge the same way you can have open access to any knowledge, but the infrastructure for open access costs a little bit. Open access journals require some investment. Open access repositories do. And if local knowledge will be open, it helps to have local infrastructure for open access, like local journals that cover that set of topics, or repositories where people can deposit. And often, parts of the world that can't afford the infrastructure can't afford to share their local knowledge. One purpose of open access from the beginning was not only to share knowledge from the North with the globe, but to share knowledge of the South with the North, and to share Southern knowledge with other Southern researchers. Often people in the neighboring city couldn't even read what you were doing because you couldn't publish in a journal, North or South, that would share it with your immediate colleagues. We badly need this local open infrastructure, and until it spreads, until it becomes sufficiently inexpensive, or until there's enough government funding to support it. One solution is shared infrastructure. Not every university needs its own repository. Universities can share a common repository. Repositories are the kinds of things that scale up pretty easily so that many institutions can share one, even if that results in high volume. And of course, open access journals don't have to be located in every university or not even every region, provided they cover the topics that matter. But one of the barriers to sharing local knowledge is that it's often written in the local language. I once worked with some open access advocates in Iceland, and a lot of Icelandic history, let's say most Icelandic history, is written in Icelandic for a good reason. And one result is it's only really useful or readable by people who know that language. And that means it tends to be published in Icelandic language journals rather than Icelandic articles in more international journals. Again, it's understandable, but what solution do we have for that? I think on the journal side, the problem will be harder to solve than on the repository side.
I was just going to, like what Peter just said made me think of something else that I would have liked to mention in this Hangout that's not directly related to what you said. But speaking of language, one of the things that Andy Nobes, who works with AuthorAid, did recently is that he wrote an article in English about decolonizing open access, and he used a lot of French language articles that he just used Google Translate to translate, and he just asked the authors to make sure to let him know if he's quoting them correctly. And that, to me, that was just, wow. I did not realize that Google Translate was that good with French because it's so bad with Arabic, but it's good with French. And that just automatically is like, oh my God, now I can read articles in French. And that's why for this week of open learning, we included the original articles by Thomas, and we also included Andy's if people really don't have the time to do that. And we've also included an article by Yvonne in Spanish because we know that Google Translate in Spanish is not bad. And I mean, that's a thing to keep in mind. You know, for some languages, I think German is also one of the languages where it's not so bad. And it's just one more thing to keep in mind. If someone wants to read stuff in that language, or if someone wants to keep publishing in their own language, but sharing it with other scholars, that's always an option. Yes. And it's very cool, Andy, that Peter Super has read your article. I didn't know if you knew that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I would like to add, because I remember that in a conference of editors in Brazil last year, I heard that they are investing a lot of money, resources in translations, professional translations. And now there's another problem for some journals because they don't have enough money. Many of them, they don't have enough money to do the translations. And the question here is, of course, if it is needed to do that, because we have these kind of tools for one way, and in other way, I don't know. Continuing the commentary of Peter, I don't know if some very local knowledge needs to be published in English or in other language that it's not the local, because, for example, in terms of the how quickly we want to spread the message. It is important for some topics or some fields to be written in Spanish, for example. I think the example of the peace trades in Colombia, that are a lot of research on human rights, and that it's very, very important for them to be read by, for example, politicians in Spanish. So this is some topic that is it's one of the main concerns now in the publishers community, because they are wondering if it's worth to translate or not the articles. And I put this as a reflection, not as an answer, because I have questions on that as well.
If I could just follow up quickly, I'm sorry if I implied that everybody should publish in English. I didn't mean to say that. What I meant was, if you publish in a language, a minority language, a small language, then you might be excluding yourself from some of the existing open access infrastructure. And that would be a shame. That's the reason why there's a tension here.
Well, I think we have time for one more question from the Twitter feed, and that is for our panelists. Do you think that the business model for higher education needs to change in order for open access to be more pervasive?
Yes. First, open access for every research niche in the world is probably less expensive to provide than what we pay now. So we already have enough money to pay for open access to everything. The trick is to find a way to spend the money on open access instead of spending it on subscription journals. That kind of redirection is very difficult to accomplish, mainly for political reasons or even cultural reasons, but financially, there's plenty of money, and we would even save money by making this conversion. I don't have an opinion or a solution on what business model we should use to get from here to there, because it's a political problem, but it's not as if we have to find new money. It's not as if we have to cut costs further than we've already cut them. We just have to find a way to spend money on open access. And we can make gradual progress at this, but I think we're more interested in making rapid progress. But we make gradual progress every time an isolated individual journal converts from subscription to open access. That's one less journal that library budgets have to pay for, and it frees up that much money to spend in support of open access. So I'm interested in how to accelerate the pace of journal flipping or journal conversions. That's one way to speed things up. I don't see a way to do it overnight, and I think people who want to do it overnight are not being realistic, but I think there are ways to speed it up, and we should all be looking at them.
Well, I would really like to add just that, yeah, definitely we don't have to spend much money, that the money we are spending in resources, but we have to reallocate in the good ways. For example, as I work with the editors, I think a good way to spend money is to improve our own journals, for example, in these regions, by providing to the employees, the people that make the journals, good tools in terms of professionalization. And I think it's one of the points that are still weak in our regions, I mean in the global south. And I think, well, the systems of higher education should put attention on this topic.
There's an initiative in the United States called the 2.5% commitment. It's a proposal, not yet a movement, but the proposal is that every library should spend 2.5% of its library budget in support of open access. And that's usually much more than they're spending today. So if they start to follow the commitment, then they will be shifting resources from something, usually subscription journals, toward open access. And of course, the idea is this is a small start. If you start with 2.5%, you're not flipping everything at once, and you can later move to 5% or 10% or more. It's just at the beginning stages, but it's worth watching.
I'm curious what libraries would be able to offer with that 2.5%. Things like repositories for institutions is the only thing I'm thinking about right now. But what else can libraries spend money on to help promote open access? It might be really obvious. I just don't know what it is.
Well, for example, we have a fund to pay APCs at fee-based open access journals for our faculty who choose to publish in that kind of journal. These funds tend to come from libraries. And so one way to support open access through a library budget is to support funds like that. Another way is to support open access books, not just open access journals. But as I said, that really does cost more money. Instead of spending, let's say, $500 to $3,000 on an article, you might be spending 15 to 20,000 articles on a book. But again, it's another way that you could spend some library funding on open access.
We're doing our first open textbook right now, and it really helps that we're working with Rebus Community. I don't know if people are aware of them. They're a Hewlett Foundation funded, and so the advantage of working with them is we get a lot of free support, technical support. So we're helping the faculty member at my center. It's a lot of work. definitely. But the Rebus community offers a lot of volunteers to help us, and the folks who work there help us. And then you get press books, open textbook for free if you offer the book as CC BY. So that was also really useful to learn about. But yeah, thank you for letting me know about the other ways that libraries can support, and I'll see if our library can do any of that. Yvonne, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just add that the libraries with this initiative can support as well the DOAJ. The DOAJ is based on the membership and the donations by libraries and associations, research associations, and we need the support to keep doing this work about quality in journals, because we are really happy with the results of our work that is, by the way, done by people in all around the world, by volunteer people, but also by professionals that are assuring you a list on journals with good quality. You can support us in the DOAJ page. Sorry, Peter.
I just want to support what Yvonne said before we quit. Another way universities can help is to spend money on open access infrastructure. The DOAJ is a good example. Sherpa Romeo is a good example. And open source tools to do the jobs we need to support open access are yet another way.
And I will just put in a plug for library consortia contributing together to the DOAJ. So that's something that the state of Virginia has done, for example, our academic library consortium. And so they've made that opportunity available for the universities and colleges in our state. So thank you to Viva, our library consortium, for that. I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up, and Maha has actually already had to skip out to another Google Hangout because she does so much of this. But I want to thank Maha and Peter and Yvonne and Thomas, who was with us briefly, for taking their time out today to talk about open access as part of the Open Access Week that Maha and I have been co-facilitating in Open Learning 18. So you can continue to follow the discussion on Twitter using the hashtag OpenLearning18. And you can also look at the openlearninghub.net website to see what else is coming up in Open Learning 18. So thank you again, Yvonne and Peter, for your time, and to Thomas and Maha, who have already had to move on to other things. It's been a great conversation today. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks to all of you.
Thank you.